Hey guys, it's Megan Aller, sales executive here at First American Title in Denver, Colorado. One of the things that I end up hearing most frequently as we make our transition into the summer months is that we start to see that there are fewer people showing up at open houses and your showing activity starts to go down. You've heard me say it before that after that happens, that typically average days on market starts to creep up. And at that point, we start to have to see price reductions rolling through our marketplace. Now what happens at the same time as we start seeing those price reductions and average prices going down is that the media starts to report out there that average sales prices are falling for the first time year over year. Now, as we start to see that messaging with additional time on market, sales prices being driven down, and then the media reporting about this, is that if this information isn't appropriately interpreted as a seasonal transition that we go through each year, that this can turn into a Chicken Little conversation where it turns into, oh my gosh, is this the end? The bubble is bursting. And before we get to that point, I want to make sure that I give you the appropriate talking points so that when this starts to come up, as it will, typically about by mid-July, is this a bubble? We're going to say at this point, no, it's not. So here's the big long story. Typically the way that we end up looking at average sales prices is that consumers tend to think that, well, prices are going up too fast, this isn't sustainable. Well, prices are determined by the relationship between supply and demand, okay? And so you have to have, for a bubble to burst, both rising prices and rising inventory. While we've completely nailed the average sales price increasing at a great rate here in Metro Denver, we've been doubling, if not tripling, what we would expect to see in terms of appreciation for the last 7 years in a row. When that starts to slow down, we don't want people to misdiagnose this and say, oh my gosh, the market is souring. That's not where we're even close to at this point in our marketplace. Now again, in order for prices to continue to rise, that would have to be coupled with increasing inventory. When we start to see inventory going up, what happens is sellers then have to compete against each other, reducing their prices, driving the average sales price down across Metro Denver. Historically, as we go through this seasonal transition, going into July, August, September, and October, our average sales prices fall back every year. Now we know how much we expect them to fall, and we end up losing somewhere between 3 to 6% of our average sales price over those next couple of months. Now that's great, and this actually comes at a very welcome time, because for those buyers who've been waiting for increased affordability, this is your window of opportunity within your annual cycle to go out there and have more negotiating power. But again, let's not confuse this seasonal transition with a longer term shift. So here's that heat map again, as you've seen it for the last few years in a row. And there's the difference between long-term cycles, buyer's market versus seller's market, versus a longer term bubble shift, okay? Or seasonal markets that we see here. Now the market still heavily favors the seller. We have rising prices, but we're missing that inventory component. And as we start to go into July, August, September, and October, you'll start to notice that in my big sea of green, where we have an indicated extreme seller's market, that you'll start to see those little orange dots pick up. But if you look closely at those little orange dots, they end up popping up about every 12 months, indicating that this is a seasonal or an annual cycle that we're pushing through at this point. Now again, most people will say, okay, great, we know that we're short on inventory, but what would we need to be in a market where we would be concerned about a bubble bursting? And before we can get to a point where the bubble would burst, we at least have to cross the threshold of equilibrium. There is a mathematical definition for what equilibrium looks like, and you should have, for every one buyer in the market, 6 homes to choose from. We also call this month's supply of inventory. Now you can see here on the graph behind me that this goes back to 2005, so we have almost 15 years of our real estate market here in Denver. And you can see that when we were building into the recession and the forthcoming bubble that burst, pushing inventory up even higher, it's over that 6-month supply of inventory, indicating that buyers had the advantage in that particular market. So as you can see, when we go into 2013 and forward from there, what ends up happening is we've dropped below 3 months worth of inventory, which indicates that we're in extreme seller's market territory, and it's held there for 7 years in a row. And it's not showing that it's going up any higher. As of right now, this number sits at 1.2 months worth of inventory for our detached market, which indicates that, gosh, we barely have more than 1 home available per buyer that's searching when we look at the marketplace as a whole. So the next question typically ends up being, well, what happens at the higher end of the market? Well, we've been really fortunate here in Metro Denver And even those properties that are sitting at 800 to $1 million or $1 million to $3 million, we still only have 2 to 3.5 months worth of inventory at the fastest part of our market, which is a screaming luxury market here in Metro Denver. It's not even fair to call a 6-month supply of inventory for those super luxury homes to be considered a market in equilibrium. Typically, we'd be looking for 12 months of inventory at that point, okay? Don't put a lot of weight into the over $3 million market. We only have a couple of handfuls of those homes here in Metro Denver, so that number can bang around all over the place, okay? Now, when we look at how many we would actually need to get to a point where we are even at equilibrium, this is the graph that we like to show people when they're having an issue overcoming what's happening with our inventory. So the number that we're keeping an eye on is the blue bar represents how many active units we actually have here in Metro Denver, while the longer red bar in most cases represents what we would need to create that 6-month supply of inventory. So as of the numbers that came in May, we would need to have about 4,800 active units, or we had about 4,800 active units for sale in our detached market. We would need to have 26,000 available to create that 6-month supply of inventory. And that just gets us to a balanced market. Now, if we look at this over time, here's how that plays out. So in this one, this shows you over that last same 15-year cycle, the blue bar represents how many active units we had in the market, while the yellow bar represents what we would need to offset demand. Now you can see at the point when we were flooding into the recession, where the pending bubble burst here in Metro Denver, you could see that we were crossing over that threshold of where we would need to be for a balanced market as we went into those winter months for 2 to 3 years prior to the bubble bursting. Then what happened when we were at the very bottom of the market back in 2010 and 2011, where prices hit our bottom for that particular time period, we had an oversupply of homes, and about 50% of those homes that were selling were of a distressed nature. Then as we go through 2013, we're far below that yellow line, indicating that we have significantly less than what we would need to be in a balanced market. So in a nutshell, what I'm trying to tell you is that in order for me to be worried about a bubble bursting, that blue bar needs to start crossing over that yellow bar, and we're nowhere close to that happening yet. As of right now, this year, we've still only stayed within about 20 to 25% of the inventory that we need to offset demand during any given month, okay? And so until we get to a point where inventory is significantly higher and prices are still going up, those are the conditions that create a bubble bursting. We're not in that territory yet. If you have more questions, or if you'd like to discuss how to overcome some of those objections that you're going to start getting about a bubble bursting, feel free to reach out to me. I'm certainly happy to help you, or you can request a copy of the slide deck by sending me an email. I hope that if we're able to help you get through this portion of our market where people are concerned about a bubble bursting that doesn't exist, you're certainly welcome to reach out to me. And I hope that we'll get to see your clients at our closing tables. Thanks. We'll see you soon.